All right, section 5b, how the new metaphysics chose us. This is a little, short essay that I wrote that I felt was, I don't know, it felt very essential at the moment. So maybe I was in a kind of state that just it demanded it to be written, but here it goes. And from the very beginning, I quote Khalil Gibran: "Verily, you are suspended like scales between your sorrow and joy. Only when you are empty are you at standstill and balanced." I have reason, end of quote. I have reason to believe being has been the fundamental mistake in terms of convincing ourselves that we possess such a grand thing. For this refutes itself in the very agonizing quality of anxiety. That, quote, I am without something, that I lack something, end quote. Thomas Jockin asserts quite clearly that this lack has form, and in our striving we give form to this lack, which becomes the revolving cycle of our day-to-day lives. We did not demand this new metaphysics. It demanded itself through our lack. It is real, it is painful, and it is not nothing. I should not need to point to the underlying existential anxiety that perpetuates itself through our epoch in politics, social, economic, psychical, and biological lives. We have made a fallacy of misplaced concreteness, which is coined by Alfred Whitehead. We have concretized being without question. This does not mean that we never attempted to define being, but that we attempted to affirm being before affirming the lack that led us to the famous question, why being rather than nothing? I do not have the answers to these questions, but the questions themselves already reveal the lack that was most pressing. Heidegger acknowledges that this having oneself arises from anxious concern, is maintained in it, and tends toward it. But is it possible that this anxious concern has been mistakenly tended towards being rather than toward this lack? The function of anxiety has a sense of direction, but we don't know where and to where this direction demands and tends. Forever we have attempted in the history of philosophy to reconcile multiplicity, unity, and other antinomies. This attempt itself is an anxious concern. By dwelling in the lack of reconcilability, I cannot help but point to the paradoxical nature that in our attempt to reach wholeness and unity, we end up annihilating ourselves. Any striving towards positive completeness is a positive annihilation, since the anxious concern still exists. This is a vicious illusion that will continue to persuade you that there must be another positive completeness that can be achieved to avoid the anxiety. However, the same cannot be said when we empty ourselves, like Khalil Gibran has alluded to in the quote that I have put above in my essay. For the emptying of ourselves is to dwell in the lack, resulting in an equilibrium that is demanded and needed for our well-being. Here we can rest, and if an anxious concern arises, it is an indication that there is a disruption in the equilibrium, and that it is demanding your emptying and your attention. Fluctuating between releasement and tension is a key feature to a flourishing existence. Anxiety should not be avoided, but is in fact the shepherd that continues to gather us and disperse us. And so that's the end of my essay. Of course, I think this is very, premature, but it's something, right? It's pointing to something. I think the big driving force, what got me writing this essay, was I did entertain the possibility of why did we at first try to attempt being rather than nothing, right? Why did we somehow put being prior, like, before nothing? Why didn't we try to affirm nothing before being? And so this is something I entertain, and I think Heidegger kind of like caught on very quickly to this idea of anxious concern. Why is it that all of philosophy, everything that we ever do, there's something that sort of pushes us to explore, pushes us to question, pushes us to want to solve something, and it begins with this anxious concern, right? This arising of just anxiousness that we refuse to dwell in because it has this sort of unbearability to it, mainly because it pushes us towards something, but we don't really know what that towards something is. And I think philosophy, for the most part, has always said that it's been towards being, and but I think there's something that has been missed in that towardsness that we've been doing. That in fact it should be that what had pushed us in the first place was this lack and the simultaneous anxious concern. So it's like we kind of missed something very much in between. Like we were being driven towards being, but we didn't know exactly what was pushing us towards being, right? And this is something I would say, it's the lack of. I'm not sure if we can equate the anxious concern with the lack, but I think it is the lack that creates the anxious concern and then pushes us in a direction. But the question is, have we been mistaken in this interpretation about that it should have been towards being? And I think that's what I really try to kind of capitalize has this been a misinterpretation? Have we assumed wrongly that this anxious concern is supposed to be towards being rather than towards the lack? All right. And that'll be the end of my talk.